Today's Tuesday, leaving on Friday to start work on Lethe. So you're going to be joining me on my road trip and in the studio, and the purpose of making this is Lethe's origins have their roots in an album I've been tinkering with since my release from prison. I had been serving a 10-year sentence for arson and was released to a halfway house in October 2014. I went back to school full-time and worked a part-time job, but I was still interested in writing and recording music. Having limited freedom again, I began to think about exploring the experiences and feelings of prisoners. The idea quickly expanded to include other outcasts, such as the homeless and the mentally ill, since these experiences often overlap, and especially since I had experienced all three myself. At first, I approached it as an angry, in-your-face kind of album. I was thinking of a Rage Against the Machine type of thing, where outcasts challenge society's values. As I wrote, the words Severus kept popping into my mind, and over time this phrase took on a kind of double meaning. On the one hand, I imagined the outcasts declaring independence from society, commanding it to sever them and allow them to live as they saw fit. On the other hand, it was a masochistic invitation for society to sever their bodies and souls, a message of internalized self-hatred. Something about these thoughts prompted me to ask myself what the difference was between demonization and being a demon. It struck me that demons symbolized outcasts quite literally, and this made me think of the story of Lucifer and the fall. That opened up a lot of symbolic territory for me that I'd never considered exploring before. The religious overtones also dredged up thoughts I'd had while incarcerated. I often related to my experience as a tour through the levels of the underworld. The experience was also a monastic one. I read books by philosophers and mystics, and regular fiction too, and spent a lot of time reflecting on my life. I joined Buddhist meditation groups and incorporated meditative walks into my daily routine for years. This translated into thousands of hours of meditation, reflection, and pondering. But prison was also a long string of conversations. Cellmates, people at the chow tables, on the yard, in the gym, in the various programs and jobs. I had thousands upon thousands of hours of conversations with society's lowest outcasts as well. The similarities between prisoners and monks' quarters had not escaped me either. Modern prisons were conceived by Quakers to give inmates an opportunity to make right with God before death. I observed that there was a similarity between cells, prison hallways, and caves. Caves are used to depict hell and the underworld, but curiously, caves are also the earliest of religious centers and meditation enclaves, and the reverberating cave-like halls of Christian cathedrals lended themselves to the invention of Western music itself. There was something about the analysis of hell, the fall, introspection, religion, and holy music that felt like the right direction for me. Around this time, I became aware of the emergence of online commentators speaking about men's issues, and the whole media shit show around them gave me more thoughts, especially as these commentators were hated and smeared in the most public and unusual ways I'd ever seen. They were met with a vitriolic hatred similar to the racism I had seen in prison, except that the people doing the hating had no semblance of public shame at all. It was not hidden away in society's underbelly. On the contrary, it was broadcast plainly across every form of popular media, as though it were a virtue. This was astonishing to me, and it added a dimension to my thoughts around outcasts, and on what it means to be demonized. It occurred to me that, in choosing to write about the homeless, the mentally ill, and incarcerated people, I was actually endeavoring to explore what was largely a male phenomenon. It was curious to me that I had never noticed that before. I also began to notice that demonic traits themselves were exaggerated male traits, both in humans and animals. Horns, brow ridges, musculature, violence, judgment, sin, crime, and punishment, risk-taking, predation, vice, and excess. And because I saw that men were being demonized by both society and other men, that there was a hidden message about men in portrayals of demons in hell. This made me wonder about angels in heaven. Many men have a tendency to pedestalize women, and it was not uncommon for prisoners to have tattoos depicting women as angels and men as demons, which gave me insight into how modern secularism and social justice seem to mirror quite a lot from religion. Demons and angels obviously have very different ideas about reality and justice. These commentators help me see how demonization of men can, in many ways, lead to their marginalization, after which many decide to deliberately embody demonic traits. I saw that this had happened in my own life, and this story hinted at a relationship between demonization and radicalization, both for the angels and the demons. All of this was running through my mind as I played with portraying subterranean sounds in music. In 2016, I was released from the halfway house and granted inmate parole. While still technically a prisoner, I was allowed to live in my own house and work with a curfew. I continued to attend school and work, but was now also interning for a music ensemble that specialized in avant-garde music. Living in my own space gave me the opportunity to play instruments again, and I bought small synthesizers with some of my student loan money. So I wanted to get a Swarmatron, right? I didn't have the money for a Swarmatron, so I thought, I'll fuck around with a Monotron and, get used to the idea of using a ribbon controller interface. And I bought one, it was like $50, and I was playing around with it. I was like, oh, this is like instant soundscape, some reverb and some fucking play around with the knobs. I put some guitar knobs on it just to make it, give me a little more fine control and shit. So I'm playing with this Monotron, and I'm playing with my Sub-Fatty, which I bought with like college money. So yeah, I'm just kind of experimenting with my synths and seeing what they can do, and I'm making these soundscapes, and I'm like, they're kind of cool. Oh, what should they be? And at first, Lethe was just going to be all soundscapes and maybe one or two songs. But scope creep came in. It became a concept I believed in more, and I really like it when that happened. Many of the instruments I tinkered with were a little better than toys, such as the Korg Monotron, the Bastel Castle, the Korg Volca Beats, and the Korg Volca Bass. All of which are featured on the album. Over the course of a year, I made around 20 or so soundscapes, and thought of publishing them, naming them after a cave image series I found called Under Earth. Eventually, I settled on the name Lethe. As time went by, some of the tracks had developed into full-fledged songs, and Lethe was evolving into something greater. But its scope would soon change even more. By late 2017, I had enough money to produce a few songs. I chose Dedication, which was the only Severus song completed at the time, and The Arsonist, a song I wrote in prison. After releasing the Dedication single, I'd built a small set list and was getting ready to perform shows. I reached out to various publications and was interviewed by Adam Perry of The Westward, a local music magazine, in preparation for a show at the Lost Lake Lounge, a small bar in East Denver. In the meanwhile, I played a few private shows, one at a mini festival, and one for a kitten-themed BDSM dungeon. As the Lost Lake Lounge show was announced, a stranger I had never met started telling people on Facebook that I was a violent misogynist and part of a hate group, and he successfully convinced the other bands in the lineup to pull out of the show. At least one of these bands started attempting to blacklist me by telling other bands not to play shows with me. Even the Westward jumped in on the bandwagon, calling me a nihilist in a bizarre article which all but called me a Nazi. It was all such an obvious and deliberate lie that I came to seriously doubt the authenticity of the Denver music scene, its activists, and became very disgusted with it all. The experience also validated what I'd heard from various alternative media figures, namely that there was a growing culture of toxic activism working to undermine free expression, free thought, free speech, and generally acting out a ruthless intolerance, paradoxically in the name of tolerance. This was perfectly encapsulated by the phrase used in the article, punch up, not down. For these people, mostly college-educated members of the middle class, shutting down a formerly mentally ill, formerly homeless felon, living far below the poverty line, and recently released from a halfway house, was punching up, while my expressing the feelings of demonized outcasts and speaking about the experiences of discarded men in an attempt to reduce crime was considered punching down. Because I was bullied through my early teens, I had a sense that these people wanted to play out some kind of power struggle between me and them. My instinct was just to disengage from the toxicity, create more music for my discography, and see what happens down the road. But Lethe's symbolism took on an entirely new dimension for me after this. Lethe refers to a mythological river whose waters cause those that drink of it to forget their memories. The phenomenon of artists who hate expression, activists who hate the marginalized, and anarchists who behave like the police was like a culture that had forgotten its own history, language, and values. They had drank from the river Lethe, and now they were setting about to create hell on earth. Realizing this, I felt inspired to expand Lethe's vision considerably. Most of the underlying instrument work was done at my home studio. Aside from the instruments I already mentioned, the album features a Moog DFAM and subvalue, the Roland JP8, Behringer Model D, as well as drum samples and guitar. My guitar rig functions sort of like a synthesizer. I loop the guitar signal back into itself several times with a short delay, which I distort, and then I go into a foot-controlled low-pass filter and another delay. You can hear my early version of this guitar sound on The Work on Or. After the preliminary work, I drove to Nashville to meet with a friend of mine who's a producer. Alright, so we're here in the studio with Mike. This is the last day of mixing, and it occurred to me that maybe people want to see the studio that it was mixed in. We recorded all the other instruments that were needed and got early mixes ready for vocals. In June, we finished up vocals here in Denver. Is it recording? But music is more complicated than any one interpretation. Every symbol and idea is attached to yet more symbols and ideas. Lethe, at a personal level, is a reaction to my show cancellation, and a general commentary on the long-term consequences for toxic activism, progressive leftism, or whatever you want to call it. I think everyone's kind of seen it by now in one way or another, and has their own way of relating to it. At a surface level, Lethe is an album about death, arrival in the underworld, the waters of Lethe, the loss of memory and self, and existence in Hades as a hollow shell in hope of a possible reincarnation. It is about being murdered by collectivists who believe they are achieving utopia and the ultimate pointlessness of collective bloodlust. At a macro level, Lethe is an analysis of our present society which, forgetting itself, is flirting with a journey through hell. Symbolically, I think Lethe in this album represents mass media and how it becomes a substitution for our own memories, thoughts, and experiences. I hope you enjoyed this mini documentary. Personally, I don't think you have to be well versed in the meaning and the story behind the album to enjoy it as everyday music. I wanted to make an album that you could share with your friends, but that you didn't have to erase a tiny piece of yourself to enjoy. And although people like to say they don't care about the politics of the musicians they listen to, I feel that it is becoming an overly politicized monoculture, and I'm tired of the monoculture. Personally, I wish everyone would just get along, and I think that truth, honesty, and voluntary interactions are the key to achieving that. Maybe Lethe can help achieve that. Have a nice one.